I'd like to be able to tell you that reading academic research is an important life skill, but the fact is that few people outside a university read academic articles. That's why they're so hard to read. These are university professors writing for themselves and for other professors. But fortunately, most empirical research articles have a very specific structure that makes them easier to understand. In this video, I describe this structure so you can learn to read these articles more efficiently. First, let me address why I'm making you do this. If this isn't useful outside of college, why bother? First, this class is about empirical research, and to understand it, you do need to read some of it. But more importantly, one of the most valuable things that you can learn in college is how to read more quickly. No matter what your future career, it will involve a lot of reading. Reading the news, reading email, policy reports, and on and on. A typical leader of an organization, like a CEO, reads around twice as fast as the typical high school graduate. Being able to process written information quickly allows them to do their jobs better and in around half the time of other people. Unfortunately, the only way to increase reading speed is to practice, a lot, and on a wide range of material. So academic articles are some of the hardest things you're going to need to read, but by expanding your vocabulary, your ability to break down a reading into its parts, and your ability to read graphs and tables, you will improve your ability to read anything. Because when you can read these, you can read anything. So almost every academic article has 7 parts. I'm not going to read these slides. They're available on our Canvas page so you can use them when you're reading articles. But what I'm going to do is walk through a research article to show you its elements. Then, in the second part of the video, I will talk about strategies for approaching an article. What to read, what to skip, how to take notes, things like that. For this video, I have chosen an article that is a particularly good example of the structure of an empirical research article. Unfortunately, not everything is as clearly written, but seeing a good version of an article can help you find these same elements in a less well-written piece. The first thing to look for in an empirical research article is the abstract. Sometimes it will be labeled abstract, but sometimes it is just a paragraph set off at the top of the article, as it is here. An abstract is a one-paragraph summary of the entire article. A well-written abstract will tell you the author's question, in this case, why there are bureaucratic delays, their proposed answer, their theory about political expediency, how they tested that answer, in this case, statistics and a new data set, and what their results were. These are the essential parts of any article, and reading this abstract is going to tell you the key points you need to know and allow you to decide whether it's worth reading the rest of the article. Unfortunately, it's not always possible to summarize an entire article in a paragraph, and some journals don't actually require abstracts for their articles. The introduction is the first page or two of an article, everything up to the first header. An introduction is going to do everything an abstract does, in a little bit more detail. In particular, it's going to have a summary not just of the research in the paper, but why it's important. It's going to describe the different theories that try to explain the outcome the author is studying, and explain how they came up with their hypothesis. And it will provide more information on the data the research gathered on the question. So I always read the abstract and the introduction of an article carefully. The next section is a review of prior research on the topic the author is studying. We call this a literature review, but it's rarely labeled that in an article. The purpose of this section is to set up the hypothesis the author is testing, establishing that it's an important or new or relevant topic, establishing that there's disagreement about the answer to their question, and then this leads to a discussion of how the author's research will help resolve that debate. A literature review typically categorizes existing research into a few groups and sets them up in contrast to one another. They can be great ways for you to learn the background on a topic. As noted, authors will then describe their answer to the research question. Sometimes they develop a full theory, but sometimes they describe a series of tests of different hypotheses. It varies depending on the author's goals. It's always great when the author writes explicit and clear hypotheses, as this one did, setting off her hypotheses as H1, H2, and H3. This makes it so much easier to figure out what they're testing, but you should always be able to identify a specific sentence, or sentences, that says what the author is actually testing. The author will then describe what information they are gathering or analyzing as part of their study. They will then explain and justify the method that they use to analyze it. The data section might be separate from methodology if it's a particularly important part of the research, or it might be combined with the method. This part will really vary depending on what type of data is used. For a survey or experiment, this section is going to cover the types of questions asked, or the way cases were selected. Text analysis will talk about how the author chose what texts to look at and what the author was looking for in them. For an article with statistical analysis, this section will describe what datasets were used and how new variables were measured and calculated. All of this is going to be helpful to know in order to evaluate the quality of the author's research. The methods section is going to be hardest for you to understand, and I really don't recommend you get too caught up in the details here. This is what you learn when you get a PhD. Rather than stress about what a non-parametric Cox model is, or whether that was the right choice for this case, focus on understanding the overall category of research. Is this statistical analysis, interview research, a field experiment? In this case, this is statistics, so that's going to tell you to look at the statistical significance and sign of the results that you see. We are going to spend the second month of class reviewing how to understand these, even though you're not going to learn exactly what a hazard ratio is. You'll be able to get the overall picture and don't need to know the details. After the author sets up how they will conduct the research in the data and methods section, they then present their results and comment on those results. You're going to read these sections differently depending on the type of research. For statistical research, you want to focus on the graphs and tables. For other types of research, you need to read in more detail to actually understand the conclusions. But what you should focus on here is whether the authors actually did what they said in the introduction. Did they actually demonstrate a causal relationship? Or is their analysis weaker than they claimed? Finally, all papers have a conclusion. This section typically talks about the implications of the research and areas for future study, but as I will explain next, no one really reads the conclusions. The summary of this study is at the beginning of the article, not at the end. So these are the sections of the paper. How can you read it quickly? First, let me be clear. No one, and I mean no one, really reads these articles from start to finish, and you should not either. The way academics can read dozens of these in a day is by focusing on the key points and what they need to get out of an article. I recommend you approach an article in 3 stages. First, get an overview. Second, read for content. And then third, think and evaluate. The first thing to do when approaching an article is to understand quickly whether it's relevant to what you're interested in. Read the abstract and the heading titles, look at whether there are graphs or tables, and get an overall understanding of what type of research this is. When you're doing background research for your research design, you might find something that has an interesting title, but when you read the abstract, you may realize it's not actually something that's going to be useful for your literature review, or it might be very similar to something you already have. If this does look like something you're interested in, then read for content. Personally, I always read the introduction carefully, but then I pick and choose what's most relevant to me. If I'm new to a topic, I'll read the literature review to better understand the issue. If I'm interested in their source of data, then I will read that section carefully. I will then read as much of the results as I need to understand their analysis. For statistical papers, you can usually just read the tables and graphs. For other research, I will skim their case studies or interview results or whatever. The worksheet that I prepared for you for your first article has the key questions to find in an article, so you can focus on finding the answers to those questions in any article that you read. What's the cause? What's the effect? What are the alternate explanations? What kind of data did they use? And so on and so forth. You're going to want to take notes on those questions on any article, and you can skim things that don't really answer those questions. Finally, you should take time to think about an article and evaluate whether it's good research or could be improved. For me, the first step is to try and summarize the article in a single sentence. This is important for 2 reasons. First, you are never going to remember everything about an article, but you can keep track of a sentence. And second, when you write a literature review, you need to be very concise in talking about existing research, so this will help you with that. Then you need to think through about whether this was a good example of research or not. Did it follow the methodology it said it would? Did its data measure the concepts well? Did it have strong internal and external validity? We're going to cover how to think about good and bad research over the next few weeks. What is validity, for example? So this is going to help you answer those questions. Finally, I just want to urge you not to get discouraged the first few times you read this kind of article. It is going to be hard. It's going to have words you don't know. It's going to be unnecessarily complicated and silly. But stick with it. This may never be something that you enjoy, but it does get easier with practice and time. It's necessary for the class, and it will help you build your reading skills overall.